The morning sky was gray, mirroring the turmoil brewing inside Jason Carter. He sat silently in his old Toyota Corolla, his fingers tapping absently on the steering wheel. From inside the car, he stared out at his own dealership, Carter's Trucks, where gleaming pickup trucks stood in neat rows like a battalion ready for battle. From the outside, everything looked perfect. A respected brand, strong sales, and a source of pride built over 15 years of sweat and ambition. But Jason knew better. He knew that the polished surface could be hiding something rotten underneath. Lately, something had been keeping him up at night. While financial reports still indicated stable growth, customer feedback had taken a troubling turn. Some praised the selection and reasonable prices, but more and more were complaining about hidden fees and aggressive sales tactics. Jason couldn't ignore those complaints. To him, this wasn't just a company, it was his legacy, a promise he'd made to himself when he started from nothing, that this place would always stand for honesty. That's why, instead of pulling up in his usual polished Mercedes today, he'd chosen to become someone entirely different. Wearing faded jeans, a worn flannel shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face, Jason transformed into Mike Thompson, a construction worker looking for a tough, reliable truck. None of the newer employees recognized him. Most had never met the real owner since Jason had handed off day-to-day operations to the management team while expanding the business. As he stepped out of the car with a slightly slouched posture, he worked hard to suppress the confident air he naturally carried. He wanted to experience his dealership as an outsider, someone the system was either serving or possibly taking advantage of. His heart pounded with a mix of anxiety and anticipation, as if walking into a battle with an uncertain outcome. From the distance, the piercing gaze of Dan Reynolds, the recently promoted sales manager, watched him from behind the showroom glass. The look sent a chill through Jason's spine. He felt like prey being sized up by a predator. Just then, a young man with a bright smile approached him eagerly and greeted him with enthusiasm. "Welcome to Carter's Trucks. I'm Tom. What brings you in today?" Jason pitched his voice slightly higher and rougher, mimicking the tone of someone used to working outdoors. "Name's Mike. I've been saving up, looking to get something tough for work. My old truck's about to fall apart." Tom lit up at the prospect of a sale, as if he'd heard that exact line 100 times before. "Well, you've come to the right place. Our heavy-duty models are perfect for job sites. What's your budget?" "About $35,000. 0 cents, Jason replied, a middle-range amount that would allow him to observe the dealership's standard sales process without raising suspicion. Tom enthusiastically led him through the lot, describing each vehicle in detail. But Jason wasn't just listening, he was observing. Every word Tom used to describe an engine, every feature he emphasized or deliberately ignored, and especially the subtle ways he tried to bundle additional packages. They stopped in front of a silver Ford F-150. Jason almost smirked. It was one of their best sellers, a familiar model. Tom jumped into his pitch without hesitation. "This one just came in last week. Strong engine, great towing capacity, and it comes with Carter's exclusive protection package included." Jason paused. That protection package, he knew, was supposed to be optional. It was never meant to be bundled into the base price. A wave of unease hit him. Maybe those customer complaints were valid, and if so, what else had been happening behind his back? He nodded, feigning interest while mentally flagging the issue. When Tom mentioned the premium protection package, Jason noted again, it was not supposed to be automatically included. Yet Tom presented it as if it were non-negotiable. Jason kept his expression neutral, though inside, he was rapidly assessing every red flag. "Mind if I pop the hood?" Jason asked in a gruff, casual tone, playing the part of a seasoned laborer. As he inspected the engine, his eyes darted to the showroom. Tom kept nervously glancing toward the glass office, where Dan Reynolds stood, stoic, calculating. still watching. Jason could feel it. Something wasn't right. After the test drive and a quick look under the hood, Jason agreed to begin the paperwork. The two of them stepped into the cool showroom, its air conditioning a stark contrast to the heat and tension swirling around the people inside. As they sat at the desk, Jason noticed Tom's hands trembling slightly as he typed. Mr. Thompson, Tom began, his earlier confidence slipping. The base price is $37,000, 0 cents. With the premium protection package and processing fees, the total comes to... He trailed off, eyes darting again to Dan's office. Jason leaned forward, still in character as Mike Thompson, but fully in control beneath the surface. What kind of processing fees are we talking about? Before Tom could answer, a loud argument at the next desk drew their attention. Jason subtly turned his head, pretending to casually glance around, his heart rate climbing. This could be it. This could be the moment he saw behind the curtain. A middle-aged man in a red delivery uniform stood clutching a stack of papers, his hands trembling with frustration. His fingers were crumpling the sheets as if he could squeeze out the stress. "This isn't right," the man said, his voice breaking. "My wife and I calculated everything down to the penny for 2 years straight." Jason saw a small photo slip out from the stack of papers, a picture of 3 smiling children gathered around a birthday cake. His heart sank. This wasn't just a transaction. It was a fragile family dream being threatened by unjustified fees. Dan appeared like a ghost in a perfectly tailored suit, his hair slicked back without a strand out of place. His face was a mix of professional charm and a coldness that made Jason's skin crawl. "Mr. Henderson," Dan began, his voice smooth as oil, "I understand your frustration, but these fees are clearly outlined in the fine print of the contract." He pulled out a copy of the agreement and pointed to a block of minuscule text at the bottom, listing out creatively named charges like market adjustment fee, mandatory extended warranty, and premium service package, all of which were thinly veiled price inflations. Mr. Henderson's face turned pale. "Josh, the salesman who worked with me, he told me the total would be $32,000, 0 cents. And now you're asking me to sign for $35, 0 cents. That's our entire family savings. We don't have any more to give." Jason felt anger rising in his chest, but he stayed seated, eyes locked on Dan. The customer complaints over the past months. Now they had a face and a voice. This wasn't speculation anymore. It was reality. He clenched his fists under the table. Outwardly, he was still Mike Thompson, but inside, Jason Carter, the real owner, felt the fire of justice beginning to burn. He knew something bigger was about to unfold, and he would be the one to spark the change, even if it meant confronting the very people he had once trusted the most. $3,000. Dan named the amount in a voice as soft as it was sharp. His professional smile stayed fixed on his face, but it never touched his eyes. "Unfortunately, Josh is no longer with the company, Mr. Henderson, and while I sympathize with your situation, verbal agreements don't hold weight when a written contract exists." He tapped the document with a well-manicured finger. "You really should have read it more carefully." From his position, Jason squinted. A small but damning detail caught his eye. The contract Dan was pointing to had today's date. The ink was still fresh. It meant those extra fees had been added after the original agreement. This wasn't an oversight. It was intentional fraud. Mark Henderson, the man who had scrimped and saved for 2 long years, now lowered his head, his voice faltering as he tried to hold on to what little dignity he had left. "My oldest daughter, she's starting college this fall." He swallowed hard. "We planned everything around getting this truck right after her graduation. My current vehicle's on its last legs. If I lose my delivery job, I can't pay for her tuition." Dan leaned back casually, adjusting the gold cufflinks on his sleeves. His expression showed no hint of empathy. "You have two options, Mr. Anderson. Pay the extra $3,000 by the end of the week, or we'll cancel the sale. Of course, under the cancellation clause, you'll forfeit your $5,000 0 cents deposit." Jason's fists tightened under the table. He watched the color drain from Mark's face, as if the man were bleeding out right there. $5,000. That was likely the family's entire emergency fund. It was the perfect trap, hidden behind a mask of legality. Pay more than you can afford, or walk away empty-handed. "This is theft," Mark muttered, voice trembling with a mix of anger and despair. "I'll report this to the owner. I'll file a complaint with the Better Business Bureau." Dan chuckled darkly, the warmth gone from his voice. "Feel free to reach out to Mr. Carter. He's very busy expanding the business into other states. Your complaint might reach his desk right around the time you make your first truck payment." He leaned in, lowering his voice, but Jason caught every word, each one like a blade carving into his sense of justice. Between a delivery driver who didn't read the fine print and the manager of a multi-million-dollar dealership, who do you think they'll believe? The air in the room grew thick, heavy with unspoken menace. That wasn't just a threat, it was a verdict. Mark lowered his head, shoulders collapsing. The last trace of hope was being crushed in silence. Jason swallowed hard. He'd seen that look before. 25 years ago, on his father's face, when their own family had been scammed by a dealership just like this one. That memory had driven him to start Carter's Trucks, with a vow that no customer would ever be treated that way again. Now, just a few steps away, it was all happening again. Under his own roof, every fiber of Jason's being screamed to stand up, rip off the mask of Mike Thompson, and declare to the entire showroom, "I'm Jason Carter, and I built this place with my soul." But he knew it wasn't time yet. If Dan was bold enough to do this in broad daylight, in full view of his staff and customers, then the corruption likely ran much deeper. "We ready to keep going, Mr. Thompson?" Tom asked nervously, voice tight with discomfort, as if his own conscience were beginning to stir. Jason nodded slowly, swallowing his fury like bitter acid. "Let's continue," he said, his tone flat, but his eyes, cold and sharp, saw everything. It was time for Jason to dig deep into the roots of what had hollowed out the soul of his business. Could I get a detailed breakdown of all the fees?" Jason asked casually, sounding like any cautious customer before signing a deal. "Just want to make sure I understand everything before I commit." Tom nodded quickly, trying to mask his tension. As he began typing on his computer, Jason glanced toward the exit where Mark Henderson, the worn-out father with narrow shoulders, was quietly walking away from the dealership. Every step was a bitter farewell to the dream he had spent 2 years building. Jason burned the image into his memory. Every wrinkle on Mark's face, the rumpled red work shirt, the lost look in his eyes. He turned back just in time to see Dan Reynolds strolling back to his office, every step like a well-fed predator retreating to its den. A smug grin still playing on his face. The golden hour sunlight streamed through the showroom's massive windows, casting long shadows across the gleaming tile floor. Within those shadows, Jason could almost see the decay spreading, a dark stain, like a cancer, eating away at the very soul of the company he had once built with all his heart. But Jason knew, to uproot this rot, he first had to understand how deep the roots ran. Who was involved? How many customers had been deceived? How many families, like the Hendersons, had been caught in the fallout? He turned back to Tom, his eyes sharp, but his voice still carrying the warm, friendly tone of Mike Thompson. Inside, he silently made a promise to Mark. Justice will come, and this time, no one will be left behind. "Hey!" Jason leaned in, like sharing a quiet secret. "Those fees your manager just mentioned to that other guy, are they gonna show up on my paperwork too?" He raised an eyebrow and glanced meaningfully toward Dan's office, silently implying, I know something's off. Tom swallowed hard, his throat bobbing visibly. He looked down, lowering his voice to a near whisper. I shouldn't be saying this, Tom stammered. But Dan, Mr. Reynolds, he has his own system. Jason stayed calm, but quietly activated the voice recorder on his phone, tucked into his shirt pocket. Makes a start with a lowball price, Tom continued, his voice shaky. The goal is to get customers emotionally attached to the vehicle. Once they're hooked, that's when we start adding the mandatory fees during the final paperwork. Jason nodded slightly, encouraging him to continue. If we don't follow the system, Tom added, we get stuck with the dead shifts. Early mornings, Sunday evenings. Times when no one comes in, no customers means no commissions. His voice broke, fingers tapping a frantic rhythm on the keyboard. A few people tried to fight back, you know. Tom leaned closer and whispered. Like Josh, the guy who sold the truck to Mr. Henderson. He refused to play along, tried to be upfront with customers, and now he's just gone. At that moment, a young couple walked into the showroom. Jason watched as another salesman rushed over, his smile wide and friendly, just like Tom's had been earlier. But now, Jason saw it for what it was, a mask, concealing the machinery of manipulation. The air in the room felt heavy, dense with secrets waiting to be exposed. Jason took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay steady, even as every word from Tom tore another layer off the illusion this dealership had once projected. This wasn't just about one corrupt manager. It was a system, carefully crafted to prey on trust. And Jason, the man who had once vowed never to let that happen, now had to be the one to tear it down. What Tom was doing with Jason wasn't random. Jason was beginning to recognize the playbook. Establish rapport quickly, build emotional connection with the vehicle, then subtly sidestep any mention of final costs. It was a deliberate pattern, refined, rehearsed, and dangerously effective. Mind if I step out for a bit? Jason asked, maintaining his laid-back tone. Just want to think it over. Tom nodded eagerly, clearly relieved to get a break from the tension. Jason took the opportunity to wander around the showroom, each step drawing him deeper into the heart of the deception. He started noticing the same script in other interactions, salespeople rushing customers through contracts, glossing over fine print, steering the conversation toward how the vehicle would make them feel. Near the finance department, Jason overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. Two employees were laughing about a recent deal. That guy was so pumped to get the truck, one of them said. Didn't even notice we snuck in the protection package. By the time he figured it out, the cooling-off period had passed. Dragon withdrew. Jason clenched his fist in his pocket. Every careless joke they cracked was someone else's broken trust. Someone who walked away feeling cheated. In the customer lounge, he struck up casual conversations with a few people waiting to finalize their purchases. A young farmer mentioned being told the market adjustment fee was a new state regulation. A retired couple thought they were getting a special discount, unaware it simply offset the inflated charges buried in their contract. On his way back to Tom's desk, Jason passed by the dealership's wall of recognition, a collection of plaques and framed certificates for outstanding customer service and community excellence. Now they felt like bitter jokes. Jason remembered the pride he'd once felt receiving them, not realizing they'd one day hang as silent indictments of the betrayal of his original values. By the coffee station, Jason spotted Dan in the middle of a group of new hires, speaking like a professor lecturing disciples. But Jason saw it clearly. This wasn't training. It was a master class in manipulation. Customers don't know what they don't know, Dan said, his tone dripping with self-assurance. Our job is to guide them to the right decision. Our decision, laughter echoed. Some laughed a little too loudly, eager to impress. Others forced a smile, eyes shifting uncomfortably. resistance, buried in silence. Back at Tom's desk, Jason decided to push a little further. "That protection package you mentioned earlier, is it really necessary?" he asked, sounding like someone carefully minding his wallet. "Sounds like it adds a lot to the price." Tom's response said everything. "Technically, it's optional," he said quietly. "But if someone declines it, their financing usually falls through, or their trade-in value drops out of nowhere." Jason didn't reply, but his mind was racing. He was starting to see a clear pattern in the paperwork. Different names for the same hidden agenda. Market adjustments, mandatory protection, premium service plans. All designed with one purpose: to squeeze every last cent from the trust of customers. When Dan stepped out of his office to rescue a faltering deal, Jason watched him closely. Dan didn't act like a manager, he moved like a seasoned manipulator. First, he listened and sympathized with the customer's concerns. Then he planted seeds of doubt about alternatives. Finally, he framed the inflated price as their only viable option. Jason realized this wasn't the work of one rogue manager. It was a system, a carefully orchestrated web of exploitation. It was time to tear it down. Jason had what he needed to begin, but to truly eliminate the disease eating away at his company, he needed more, and the time to strike was fast approaching. The rot inside Carter's trucks, a name once synonymous with trust and transparency, was now in plain sight. Dan Reynolds, with his polished appearance and smooth talk, had quietly built an empire of deception right under the shadow of the ideals Jason Carter had worked so hard to create. At this dealership, deceit wasn't just tolerated, it was rewarded. Those who played by Dan's rules were given prime shifts, hot leads, and easy bonuses. Those who told the truth were pushed into the dark, forgotten, discarded like garbage. Jason was witnessing it all unfold, not as rumor, but as reality, hidden behind professional smiles and fine print. As the last rays of sunlight faded, Tom quietly slid the preliminary contract across the desk. "So, Mr. Thompson, should we move forward?" he asked, his voice a mix of hope and guilt. Hope for a commission, guilt for the deception he knew he was about to commit. Jason looked down at the contract. The original price had ballooned with strange fees and mandatory service packages. The same trap he had seen spring on so many others was now being set for him. But now he had enough evidence. The only question was no longer if he should confront Dan, but how to do it in a way that left him no escape. He needed one final piece. A confession. A moment of arrogance to trip Dan up. "Actually," Jason said as he stood, adjusting his shirt, "before I sign anything, I'd like to talk to the manager about these fees. Would you mind calling him for me?" Tom's face flickered with hesitation, but he nodded and walked over to Dan's office. From behind the glass, Jason watched the brief exchange. Dan's expression shifted from annoyance to predatory interest in seconds. Like a predator spotting fresh prey, Jason understood then Dan didn't just run the place. He thrived on the power it gave him. Moments later, Jason was seated in Dan Reynolds' office, a room designed to exude authority, with dark wood furniture, leather chairs, and framed family photos arranged like props in an elaborate performance of integrity. "Mr. Thompson," Dan began, voice silky smooth but eyes icy, "I hear you've got some concerns about our pricing structure." Jason nodded, slipping perfectly into character. The honest working man just trying to understand the complex fine print. "Well, I noticed what happened with that other customer earlier," he said, playing the part of a cautious buyer. "All those added fees got me wondering if I'm about to go through the same thing." Dan leaned back, arms folded, evaluating Jason like a product on a shelf. Then he smiled, a smile with no warmth at all. "You're sharp, Mr. Thompson. Not like most of the folks who walk in here," he said with a chuckle. I respect a man who pays attention to the details. Jason tilted his head slightly, voice calm, while in his pocket, his finger quietly activated the phone's voice recorder. So, those fees. Are they actually standard? He asked, sounding uncertain, but in truth, setting the perfect trap. Dan laughed, this time with smug confidence. Jason knew. Dan now thought he had full control of the conversation. And that arrogance, that blind spot, was going to be his undoing. Leaning in, Dan dropped his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. This business isn't really about selling trucks, Mr. Thompson. We sell dreams. People come in here thinking they're buying transportation, but what they're really buying is status, power. The American dream on 4 wheels. He walked over to the window, gazing out at the lot bathed in the amber glow of dusk. See those people out there? They don't know what they want until we tell them. They don't know what they can afford until we show them how to stretch it. It's all about guiding perception. Jason gripped the armrest beneath the table, his anger boiling just beneath the surface, but he kept his expression composed. Doesn't that feel a little dishonest? He asked, trying to keep his tone light. Dan turned around, eyes gleaming like a predator spotting resistance. Dishonest? Carter, the old man who owns this place, he only cares about the numbers. As long as the profits keep rising, he doesn't ask questions. And trust me, the numbers have never looked better. What about customers who can't really afford all the hidden charges? Jason pushed gently. Dan smirked. That's the beauty of it. By the time they realize what's happened, they're already emotionally committed. No one wants to admit they've been duped. Pride's a powerful thing, Mr. Thompson. Most folks would rather drown in debt than admit they got conned. Jason could feel his nails digging into the leather armrest, but he didn't move. And the owner really has no idea? He asked, lining up the final move. Dan burst into laughter, this time openly mocking. Carter? He's a relic. Still believes in old-school values like honesty and customer service. This is the real world, friend. The last guy who tried to rat us out. I buried his complaints so deep in paperwork, it's probably still rotting in some file cabinet. Dan circled the desk and perched on its edge, now fully relaxed. You're a smart guy, so let me make this simple. That so-called mandatory protection package, I can make it disappear for a little cash under the table. Think of it as buying your way into how things really work around here. Jason's pulse quickened, a clear offer of bribery. Everything he needed was now being recorded, second by damning second. Dan went on, still grinning. I've been perfecting this system for 2 years. The boss is too trusting, the customers too desperate, the staff too scared. Nobody's going to stop me. I've made more off kickbacks this year than Carter probably makes in legal profit. And he's still out there dreaming about national expansion. He pulled out a contract and laid it in front of Jason. So, Mr. Thompson, ready to be one of the smart ones who knows how the game is really played? Jason stared at the contract. In his mind, every piece of the puzzle had snapped into place. Fraud, manipulation, bribery, all openly confessed by the man at the center of it. But he wasn't done. He wanted to push Dan all the way to the edge. So everyone's in on this? Jason asked, eyebrows raised like an innocent question. The ones that matter, yeah, Dan said, now completely unguarded. The rest either fall in line or find somewhere else to work. Survival of the fittest, right? Darwin would be proud. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. Between us, I've made more in kickbacks this year than Carter earns legally. This place, it's a gold mine, and the old man's too busy chasing expansion dreams to notice. Jason sat still. He wasn't angry anymore. What he felt now was a cold, surgical clarity, a full understanding that the dream he had spent his life building had been twisted into a machine that bled people dry. But he was ready. The game ended here. Jason stood up slowly and removed the baseball cap that had hidden his identity all day. Actually, Dan, he said, voice deep and firm, no longer Mike Thompson, but Jason Carter in the flesh. I think it's time we had a talk about your job." He straightened to his full height, the last rays of sunlight casting fire in his eyes. Dan's face changed instantly, from confusion to shock, and then to sheer panic. His face went pale, as if all the blood had drained from his body in an instant. The fear was unmistakable. There was no trace left of the smug arrogance from moments earlier. He stumbled backward, knocking over everything on the desk where he once sat like a king. "Mr. Carter," Dan stammered, voice trembling. I can explain, can you?" Jason replied, his tone sharp as steel. He pulled out his phone and tapped play. Instantly, the office filled with Dan's own voice. Arrogant, deceitful, manipulative. The boss is too trusting. The customers are too desperate. Jason picked up the intercom. All staff to the main showroom floor immediately. Emergency meeting, no exception. Dan panicked and lunged for his computer, clearly trying to erase evidence, but Jason stepped in front of him. "Touch that machine again," he warned coldly, "and I'll be adding destruction of evidence to your charges." Within minutes, the showroom was packed with employees. The evening sun cast long shadows through the glass, while inside the air was thick with confusion and unease. Jason stood at the center, not the humble customer he had pretended to be, but the founder, the true owner, the man who once built this place on integrity. "If you don't know who I am," Jason said, his voice ringing out, "I'm Jason Carter, owner of this dealership." The room fell into stunned silence. "Today I uncovered something unacceptable about how this business has been run. And I'm telling you now, it ends today." He replayed key excerpts from the recordings. Dan's shameless admissions of fraud, bribery, and utter contempt for customers. The words echoed through the room like hammer blows to the dealership's honor. The atmosphere grew heavier. Some employees looked down in shame. Others exchanged looks of fury. A few, the ones who had resisted the corruption, finally let out a breath of relief. "Tom?" Jason turned to the young salesman who had helped him earlier. "Tell everyone what you told me about how shift hours were assigned." Tom stepped forward, voice shaky at first, but gaining strength as he exposed the truth. About the reward system, how honest employees were pushed to the margins while dishonest ones were favored. Jason continued. Matthews explained, "I've spent the entire day collecting evidence, and this isn't just a matter of breaking company policy. We're talking about violations of state and federal law." He turned toward Dan, who stood frozen near the exit, his face a mask of dread. "Would you like to explain how you buried customer complaints, or should I go ahead and talk about the bribes you took?" Dan shouted, desperate. "You don't have any proof." Jason held up his phone. "I have hours of recordings, including your detailed explanation of how you scammed customers and altered contracts. And our IT team is currently extracting every piece of data from your system." He faced the staff again, and placing an immediate freeze on all pending transactions. "Every contract from the past 6 months will be reviewed. If you've been involved in this is your one chance to come forward. Provide full documentation and we'll discuss your future here. But if you hide anything, you'll be terminated without reference and could face legal action." A long, heavy silence fell over the room. Then, one by one, employees began stepping forward. Some confessed. Others exposed what they had seen. The truth began rising like a tide. Jason turned to Dan, who was now trying to edge toward the exit. "Dan Reynolds," he said, his voice hard as stone. "You are terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. You are not to delete a single file." Right on cue, 2 security guards appeared. Dan resisted. "You're destroying your own business," he yelled. "I was the one making you money. Without me, this place will collapse." Jason looked him straight in the eyes. "I'd rather earn $1 honest than steal 100 from someone's trust." Jason turned to the security guards. "Make sure Mr. Reynolds doesn't leave with anything that doesn't belong to him, especially customer files and contracts." As Dan was escorted out, Jason turned back to face the entire staff. "Starting tomorrow, we begin to repair everything that's been broken. Every customer who was wrongly charged will be contacted and refunded. Every act of fraud will be erased. Every dishonest practice ends now. He paused, scanning the room, locking eyes with employees who had once been forced into silence. Some of you tried to speak up, and I'm sorry I wasn't here to hear you. But today I make you this promise. Carter's Trucks will return to the values it was built on: honesty, respect, and trust. Jason looked around the showroom, a place that had once been the stage for deception, now filled with the heavy silence of truth laid bare. At this dealership, if you stood for integrity, you were punished. That ends today. From now on, honesty will be rewarded, not driven out. A slow clap broke the tension. Everyone turned to see Mark Henderson, the man who once stood there in defeat, now at the entrance, his eyes brimming with tears. "Mr. Henderson," Jason walked over, his voice sincere, "we're going to review your contract. In fact, you'll be receiving the truck at the original quoted price, and every improper fee will be fully refunded." Mark's voice trembled. "My daughter? Her tuition will be paid on time now." Jason placed a hand on his shoulder. "On behalf of Carter's Trucks, I offer my deepest apology. We let you down, but now we're making it right." The energy in the room shifted. Relief replaced anxiety. Hope began to rise from the ashes of betrayal. There were nods, smiles beginning to form. A new beginning was taking root. "Today is a new start," Jason declared. "We'll rebuild trust, one customer at a time." In the weeks that followed, Carter's Trucks underwent a complete transformation. Jason established a pricing transparency team and installed large digital displays showing every vehicle's price, with every fee and add-on clearly listed. Above the front doors, a new motto was mounted: clarity, honesty, trust. One morning, Tom, the brave young salesman, approached Jason, carrying a thick folder. "Sir, I've been keeping records of every questionable transaction Dan forced us into. Dates, amounts, customer names. It's all here." Jason took the folder, his eyes filled with respect. "You took a big risk, Tom. My father used to say, do the right thing, even when no one's watching." Jason smiled. "Your father was a wise man. How would you feel about leading our new customer advocacy department?" Tom nodded, eyes shining with determination. But Jason didn't stop at policy changes. He personally called every customer who had been overcharged, apologizing and issuing refunds. The dealership's conference room became a reconciliation center where customers could bring in their contracts and receive justice. Many left in tears, not of anger, but of relief, finally validated that they weren't crazy. They'd been manipulated. One Saturday morning, a familiar face returned to the showroom. Josh, the salesman fired for refusing to deceive customers. Jason had personally tracked him down and offered him not just his job back, but a new role as head of sales training, tasked with teaching ethical practices. "We're not just selling trucks," Josh told a group of new hires. "We're building trust. When a customer walks out of here, they should feel confident, not confused." Local media caught wind of the story. But what captured the community's attention wasn't the undercover boss exposing corruption. It was how Carter's Trucks rose from the ashes. Mark Henderson's story became a symbol of redemption. Jason even launched a scholarship fund in Mark's daughter's name, offering educational support to the children of customers. "We're not just in the business of selling trucks anymore," Jason told a reporter. "We're part of this community, and I believe success and integrity can coexist." Profits initially dipped, but the honesty drew in a flood of new customers. No haggling, no hidden fees, just fair prices and genuine service. 6 months later, Carter's Trucks held a Community Appreciation Day. The lot was filled with laughter and families enjoying food, music, and activities. Children played in bounce houses while parents browsed vehicles, without pressure or tricks. Jason stood quietly in a corner of the showroom, the same place he had parked his old Toyota months ago when he came undercover. The dealership was different now, not just in appearance, but in soul. Mark approached him with a handshake. "What you've done here, it's bigger than trucks," he said. "You reminded us that integrity still matters." Jason nodded, watching as the last customers of the day drove off with smiles on their faces. "Sometimes," he replied, "you have to tear it all down to rebuild it right. But it's worth it when you see families get exactly what they were promised. No scams, no regrets." Mountains. Under the night sky, the Carter's Trucks sign glowed brightly. Between rows of shining trucks, each one now carried more than horsepower. It carried trust. Inside his office, Jason had added a final touch, a framed photo of his father's old dealership, the place where it all began. Beside it hung a new sign that read, "First is earned, one honest deal at a time." As he walked to his car that night, Jason felt something simple yet profound. He hadn't just saved a business, he had rebuilt a legacy. And sometimes the best way to lead is to step into the shadows and bring the light back yourself.